Welcome back to World Decoded today. We're bringing you the complete story of the bloodiest war in human history, from how it began to why more than 70 million people lost their lives. If you enjoy history documentaries like this, make sure to subscribe to World Decoded and turn on notifications so you never miss our next video. The bloodiest war in human history, why 70 million people died. Imagine going to sleep and waking up to a world at war. Cities are on fire, the skies are filled with bombers, millions of innocent people are running for their lives. This wasn't a nightmare, it really happened. In just 6 years, the deadliest war in human history claimed more than 70 million lives and changed the future of the entire world forever. But how did one conflict become so devastating? Who started it? And why couldn't anyone stop it? We're uncovering the shocking true story of the bloodiest war in human history. To understand how the bloodiest war in human history began, we have to go back to the end of the First World War. In 1919, Germany was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles. The country lost land, its military was heavily restricted, and it had to pay enormous reparations. Millions of Germans believed they had been humiliated. As the years passed, Germany's economy collapsed. Inflation became so severe that people carried bags full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. Unemployment soared and hope slowly disappeared. Then, one man promised to change everything. Adolf Hitler told the German people that he would rebuild the country, restore its pride, and make Germany powerful again. His speeches attracted millions, and in 1933, he became Germany's leader. But Hitler wasn't satisfied with rebuilding Germany. He wanted more land, more power, and eventually control over Europe. Over the next few years, he rebuilt Germany's military in secret despite international agreements. One by one, neighboring territories fell under his control, while many world leaders hoped they could avoid another global war. They were wrong. On September 1st, 1939, German forces crossed into Poland with a massive surprise attack. Tanks rolled across the border, aircraft bombed cities, and thousands of soldiers advanced at incredible speed. Just 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had officially begun, but almost no one realized that this conflict would soon spread across continents, involve dozens of nations, and become the deadliest war humanity had ever witnessed. And this was only the beginning. Within months, Hitler's armies would shock the world with victories nobody thought were possible. One country after another would fall, and it would seem as if nothing could stop Nazi Germany. But the biggest battle was still ahead. Within months, Hitler's war machine was unstoppable. Using a new strategy called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, German forces attacked with incredible speed. Fighter planes struck from the air while tanks and soldiers advanced before their enemies had time to react. Poland fell first, then came Denmark and Norway. Soon after, Belgium and the Netherlands were overrun. In June 1940, France, one of Europe's strongest military powers, collapsed in just a few weeks. Across the world, people were asking the same question. Could anyone stop Hitler? Britain stood alone. Night after night, German bombers filled the skies over London. Homes, schools, and factories were destroyed. Families spent countless nights hiding in underground shelters while explosions echoed above them. Yet Britain refused to surrender. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic Ocean, the United States watched the war from a distance. Most Americans wanted to stay out of another European conflict. The memory of World War I was still fresh, and few believed this was America's fight. But President Franklin D. Roosevelt knew that if Hitler controlled Europe, the balance of power across the world could change forever. Instead of sending troops, America began supplying Britain with weapons, food, and military equipment, keeping one of Hitler's last major opponents alive. Then, on the other side of the world, another powerful nation was expanding. Japan was rapidly building its empire across Asia, capturing more territory and bringing the Pacific closer to war. The world was no longer facing one growing conflict. It was heading toward a global catastrophe. And then, on the morning of December 7th, 1941, everything changed. A surprise attack on an American naval base would pull the United States into the war and transform World War II into the deadliest conflict in human history. That attack was Pearl Harbor. On the morning of December 7, 1941, hundreds of Japanese aircraft suddenly appeared over Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Within minutes, battleships were burning, airfields were destroyed, and more than 2,400 Americans had lost their lives. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan. Just days later, Germany declared war on America. The conflict that had started in Europe was now a truly global war. America's factories switched almost overnight to producing tanks, aircraft, ships, and weapons on a massive scale. Millions of men joined the military, while millions of women stepped into factories to keep the country running. The balance of the war was beginning to change. In the Pacific, the United States scored a crucial victory at the Battle of Midway, destroying 4 Japanese aircraft carriers and slowing Japan's expansion. Meanwhile, in Europe, Hitler made what many historians consider his greatest mistake. Ignoring the brutal Russian winter, he ordered a full-scale invasion of the Soviet Union. At first, German forces advanced rapidly, but then came the freezing temperatures, supply shortages, and fierce Soviet resistance. Everything came down to one city, Stalingrad. For months, soldiers fought street by street, house by house. Food ran out. Ammunition became scarce. Thousands died in the freezing cold. When the battle finally ended in early 1943, Germany had suffered one of the worst defeats in its history. For the first time, Hitler's army was retreating instead of advancing. The myth that Nazi Germany could never be defeated had been shattered. From that moment on, the Allies began pushing back from every direction. But as the war entered its final stage, the fighting became even more destructive. Entire cities were reduced to rubble. Millions of civilians were caught in the middle. And then, scientists working on a secret American project finished developing a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. Weapon that would end the war, but forever, change the future of humanity. By 1944, the tide of the war had completely turned. The Allies were advancing from the west, while the Soviet army pushed from the east. Nazi Germany was now trapped between 2 powerful forces. Then came one of the most important military operations in history. On June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, more than 150,000 Allied soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy, France. Under heavy machine gun fire, thousands of young soldiers ran across open beaches, knowing many would never make it home. The invasion was a success. It marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Over the following months, Allied forces liberated city after city. People who had lived under Nazi occupation for years finally saw freedom return. As the Allies moved deeper into German territory, they uncovered something almost impossible to believe. Hidden behind barbed wire were Nazi concentration camps. Millions of innocent people, including Jews, political prisoners, Roma, disabled people, and others, had been imprisoned under horrific conditions. Many had died from starvation, disease, forced labor, or systematic murder. The world was shocked. The true scale of Nazi crimes became clear only after the war was nearly over. Meanwhile, German cities were under constant bombing. Supplies were running out, fuel was almost gone, and the German military was collapsing. In April 1945, Soviet troops entered Berlin. With defeat unavoidable, Adolf Hitler remained inside his underground bunker. As enemy forces closed in, he took his own life. Just days later, on May 8, 1945, Germany officially surrendered. Across Europe, people poured into the streets. Church bells rang. Soldiers embraced strangers. Families celebrated, believing the nightmare was finally over, but it wasn't. Thousands of miles away, the war in the Pacific continued. Japan refused to surrender despite suffering devastating losses. Every battle cost tens of thousands of lives, and military leaders feared that invading mainland Japan could kill hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers and even more Japanese civilians. The United States faced an impossible decision. After years of secret research under the Manhattan Project, America had created the world's first atomic bomb. No nation had ever used a weapon like it before. On August 6, 1945, an American bomber dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. In a matter of seconds, much of the city was destroyed. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The destruction was unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. Soon afterward, Japan announced its surrender. On September 2, 1945, World War II officially came to an end, but victory came at a heartbreaking cost. More than 70 million people had lost their lives. Millions of soldiers never returned home. Entire cities had been reduced to ruins. Families were separated. Forever, countless children grew up without parents. And much of Europe and Asia had to be rebuilt from the ground up. Yet from the ashes of war, a new world began to emerge. The United Nations was created with the hope of preventing another global conflict. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the world's two superpowers, beginning a new era known as the Cold War. New technologies developed during the war changed medicine, aviation, engineering, and communication, but perhaps the greatest lesson of